Today we're going to be talking about hamster cages, so you may want to get comfy and grab a snack. Hamsters originally started out in laboratories being tested for different things, and the cages they used were quite small. Once hamsters started appearing in people's homes as pets and in the pet trade, manufacturers started making cages that would fit easily in the home without taking up a lot of space, and which was essentially most convenient for the owner and not the pet. Marketed as something fun to connect and collect, and in fact, the brand Habit was first owned by Metaframe/Living World, which is a division of Mattel Toy, which would explain why they target children so much and focus on the entertainment aspect rather than what the pet needs in order to thrive. Hamsters are very active animals and would travel many miles every night in the wild, foraging, working on their burrows, and gathering nesting materials. And as you may know, our hamsters in captivity spend many hours on the wheel every single night. But this is not a replacement for a large enclosure, as a wheel helps burn energy off, but it does not allow a hamster to do other activities. Hamsters, while domesticated, still are very similar to their wild ancestors. Therefore, it is super important that they have a large enclosure in order for the hamster to thrive and be happy. Small cages can cause repetitive boredom behaviors. Unfortunately, these boredom behaviors have been seen as normal hamster behaviors. That's just something all hamsters do, when in fact, that's not the case. These behaviors are common, not normal. Boredom behaviors can indicate an unhappy hamster, which can lead to stress. And as we all know, stress is not good for the body. A stressed hamster is more prone to health issues as well as a shortened lifespan. The typical boredom behaviors you'll see with a hamster would include bar biting and chewing the cage. This is when a hamster repetitively chews on the cage, whether it be the bars of a wired enclosure or the silicone in the corner of an aquarium. This is not normal chewing, and it is not a hamster trying to wear down their teeth like many people think. This is an obsessive behavior that indicates a stressed hamster. It can lead to sores around the mouth and nose, as well as misaligned teeth, which can lead to other serious issues. Cage aggression. Some hamsters will become very territorial over their cage when the cage is too small. This means anytime you go to put your hand into the enclosure, the hamster comes charging at you, tries to bite you, or hisses at you, and they will not let you do anything in the enclosure. But if the hamster is taken out of the enclosure, they are a completely different hamster. They are calm and they don't bite you. Cage pacing. This is when the hamster runs back and forth against the walls of the enclosure. This is more commonly seen in an aquarium-styled cage. Monkey barring and wall scaling. Inside of a wire cage, this behavior can be seen as a hamster constantly climbing on the bars of a cage like a monkey or hanging from them. Or if in an aquarium, it will be seen as wall scaling, and this is when the hamster is constantly jumping up against the sides of the glass, or even constantly tries to climb on other objects in order to try and escape. Lethargy. This is when a hamster no longer does much of anything, and the owner often looks at it as the hamster just being lazy. But if nothing is given to the hamster to do, then there isn't anything for them to do besides run on a hamster wheel. Overall, these behaviors do affect the hamster. A small enclosure leaves a hamster to simply live a life of stress and lack of enrichment because there isn't enough room to provide proper enrichment for the hamster. Minimums versus recommended sizes. There are so many minimums seen throughout the hamster community. Essentially, a minimum means the absolutely smallest amount you can do. When it comes to animals, a minimum means the absolute smallest area an animal can live in humanely without it being cruel. So for this reason is why your hamster can still be unhappy in an enclosure that is over the minimum. Because the minimum isn't a magical happy number, it's a limit given to ensure that you humanely care for your pet. Hamsters can be unhappy in the largest of cages, and that should just go to show how important cage size is and how much space this tiny little creature truly actually needs. Recommended cage sizes are generally given by experienced hamster owners who know what species does best in what sized cage based on their experiences with owning hamsters. And generally, a recommended cage size is going to be larger than what a minimum is. As for minimums, they vary from different countries and organizations. Keep in mind all of the accessories used in the minimums are all necessary items as well as suitably sized for all hamsters. First, we have American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and their minimum is 200 square inches of floor space. The Canadian Council on Animal Care's minimum is 100 square inches of floor space. PetSmart's minimum for their dwarf hamsters is 144 square inches of floor space, and for Syrians, their minimum is 200 square inches of floor space. Hamster Society Singapore's minimum for dwarfs is 434 square inches of floor space, and for Syrians, 620 square inches of floor space. Hamster South Africa's minimum for dwarf hamsters is 465 square inches of floor space, and for Syrians, 558 square inches of floor space. Ontario Hamster Club, California Hamster Association, and many North American hamster owners' minimum is 450 square inches of floor space. Wood Green Animal Charity and many UK hamster owners' minimum is 620 square inches of floor space. And the TVT, which is Germany's Veterinary Association for Animal Welfare's minimum, is 775 square inches of floor space. So it's in the hamster's best interest that you go with a cage that is as large as possible. In my own personal experience, I would recommend cages that are 800 square inches of floor space or larger. There was a study done in 2007 by Kay Fisher. He looked into the behavior of Syrian hamsters in 4 different cage sizes. He took 60 female Syrian hamsters and housed them individually in cage sizes of 279 square inches, 387 square inches, 775 square inches, and 1,550 square inches. Bar chewing was observed in all 4 cage sizes, but the hamsters housed in the smaller cage sizes chewed the bars significantly longer and more often. So Kay Fisher came to the conclusion that in order for proper welfare of the Syrian hamster, they should have a minimum of 1,550 square inches of floor space. It's also important to point out enrichment is just as important as cage size. A large enclosure that is basically completely empty is still going to leave you with an unhappy hamster. How to measure your hamster's cage. Measuring your hamster's cage can easily be done, and all you need is a tape measure and a calculator. We're going to start by measuring the width and the length of the bottom inside of the enclosure. We don't want to measure on the outside or at the top of the enclosure because these can give you inaccurate results. Then we are going to multiply the 2 numbers that we get, and that is going to give you your total floor space. Depending on what unit of measurement you use to measure your cage, you can get different results. So for example, 30 inches by 15 inches is going to give you 450 square inches of floor space. But if you're measuring in centimeters, 76.2 centimeters by 38.1 centimeters is going to give you 2,903.22 centimeter squared. Now this is the same sized cage, just different units of measurement. If you need to convert your square centimeters to square inches to make it easier determining how large your enclosure is, then you can do so easily with Google. Not sponsored. All you have to do is take your square centimeters and say 2 inches, and Google will very easily and fastly do the math for you. If pet store cages are too small, then why do they sell them? I think there's a combination of reasons behind why pet stores still sell small cages. For one, a lot of people still consider hamsters as novelty, disposable, cheap pets, and so they lack a lot of laws, unlike dogs and cats. There is really no law saying how large a hamster cage has to be. The smaller the cage, the more likely it is to fit in every single household out there, which then means more people are able to buy hamsters, which then means they get more money. If you are still young and maybe you don't understand how the world works, but it essentially runs around money. You need money to live, and people love money. So unfortunately, a lot of the times pet stores are going to put profit over your pet's well-being. Another reasoning is that the smaller the hamster cage, the more that can fit onto a shelf, which then makes more space in the pet store for them to be able to put other different products on there, because a large cage can often take a lot of space up in the pet store, and they don't exactly want that. They want to be able to sell multiple different products and not take up a ton of shelf space. Okay, but what about connecting small cages together? While connecting multiple small cages together is better than just having one small cage, it still does not compete with just one large cage. This is because small enclosures already don't allow the hamster to do much enrichment, so making the hamster have to crawl through different tubes to get to the next section of the cage really isn't doing a lot for them. So essentially, connecting cages together doesn't count towards floor space unless you are connecting two really large enclosures together. Do levels make the cage bigger? No, but they do count towards enrichment, which is still good, but they don't count towards the overall floor space. If you have a 200 square inch cage with a 100 square inch level, you aren't going to add those two together. It's still going to be a 200 square inch cage. So what's better, wire or glass? From personal experience, a glass tank is going to have more pros than a wire cage, simply because they come in a lot larger sizes and they allow you to actually put a proper amount of substrate for the hamster. Many worry about a glass enclosure's ventilation and ammonia buildup, but because hamsters have adapted to living in dry environments, they actually produce very concentrated small amounts of urine. And so the less urine there is, the less ammonia there is. So unless you've completely neglected to ever clean your hamster's enclosure, then ammonia buildup isn't a concern with hamsters. Upgrading the cage. If you already have a hamster and you've realized that their cage is too small and you'd like to upgrade to something bigger, that's great. But you're going to want to do so properly to avoid as much stress as possible. Moves can be stressful, so if you can connect the old cage to the new cage somehow, that's a great way to get the hamster used to the new large cage, and after a couple of weeks you can eventually take away the old cage. If you're not able to do that, I would recommend taking all of the old bedding and putting it in the new cage, as well as keeping the layout the exact same way so it feels more familiar to the hamster. Make sure you give your hamster a couple of weeks to settle in. If your hamster seems unsettled the first day, don't switch them back to the old cage and then proceed to say that your hamster doesn't like large enclosures. Give them time to create their own nest and go around the cage and scent mark and make it feel familiar to them. So I think that is everything I can tell you guys about hamster cages and cage sizes. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and hopefully it wasn't too boring. So I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!